June 22, 1973, the Oval Office. The weight of the world on his shoulders. Richard Nixon, eyes fixed on the camera, addressed the nation. His voice, usually a booming baritone, was subdued, almost a whisper. He spoke of a cover-up, of a breach of trust, of his own failings. The words Watergate hung in the air, a storm cloud over the presidency.
Nixon, the master of political maneuvering, the architect of détente, admitted his role in the Watergate scandal, not a denial, not an obfuscation, a confession. He took responsibility for the actions of his subordinates, for the lies, for the obstruction of justice. He acknowledged the betrayal of the public trust, the very foundation of his office.
The nation watched, transfixed. Could this be the same Nixon who had clawed his way to the top? The fierce competitor, the ruthless politician? The confession, unexpected and raw, sent shockwaves through the country.
In that single moment of vulnerability, Nixon did something extraordinary. He shattered the image of the imperial presidency. He acknowledged the power of truth, even when it threatened to destroy him. The initial reaction was one of disbelief. Newspapers scrambled to update headlines. Television screens flickered with images of a somber Nixon. The country was in uncharted territory. A president admitting guilt, taking responsibility. Public opinion, deeply divided in the months leading up to the confession, began to shift. Some felt a sense of relief. The truth, however painful, was out. Others remained skeptical. Was this another Nixonian maneuver, a calculated ploy to save his presidency? Within the halls of Congress, the mood was electric. The impeachment proceedings, already in motion, screeched to a halt. Some congressmen, initially eager to remove Nixon from office, now found themselves grappling with a moral dilemma. Could they, in good conscience, impeach a president who had confessed his sins? The world watched, holding its breath. The Cold War raged on. The Middle East simmered with tension. The leader of the free world had just laid bare his flaws. Would America's enemies see an opportunity in this moment of weakness? Would its allies lose faith? The nation held its breath as Congress grappled with the question of impeachment. The House Judiciary Committee, tasked with investigating the Watergate scandal, found itself at a crossroads. The evidence against Nixon was damning, but could they, in good conscience, proceed with impeachment after his confession? A wave of pragmatism swept through Congress. The country, still reeling from the Vietnam War and Watergate, craved stability. Impeachment, a drawn-out and divisive process, threatened to further destabilize the nation.
Nixon, sensing an opportunity, offered a compromise. He would not resign from office, but he would submit to a censure by Congress, a formal reprimand for his actions. He pledged to dedicate the remainder of his term to healing the nation and restoring trust in the government.
Congress, in a historic vote, agreed to censure Nixon. The impeachment proceedings were dropped. The nation, exhausted by scandal, breathed a collective sigh of relief. The crisis, it seemed, had passed. With the shadow of Watergate receding, Nixon, his political capital depleted but not entirely spent, turned his attention to domestic issues. He saw an opportunity to salvage his legacy, to be remembered not for his transgressions but for his accomplishments. Nixon, a shrewd political operator, understood that the American people craved stability and prosperity. He focused on issues with broad bipartisan support, such as environmental protection and healthcare reform.
He worked with Congress to establish the Environmental Protection Agency, a landmark achievement that cemented his legacy as a champion of environmentalism. He also signed into law the Health Maintenance Organization Act, a precursor to modern-day HMOs, expanding access to affordable health care for millions of Americans.
These domestic achievements, while overshadowed by Watergate, demonstrated Nixon's capacity for effective governance. He proved that even a wounded president, humbled by scandal, could still achieve meaningful results. Section 5, Global Statesman, Navigating the Cold War. On the world stage, Nixon continued his policy of détente with the Soviet Union. He understood that the Cold War, a nuclear standoff that had gripped the world for decades, could not continue indefinitely. He sought to ease tensions, to find common ground with the Soviets.
My goal was to create a more stable and peaceful world. We couldn't keep living under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation.
Nixon's historic visit to China in 1972 had already shifted the geopolitical landscape. He built on this breakthrough, engaging in high-stakes summits with Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev.
Opening diplomatic channels with China was just the beginning. We needed to extend that spirit of cooperation to the Soviet Union as well.
These summits resulted in the signing of the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, or SALT I, a landmark agreement that limited the number of nuclear weapons possessed by both superpowers. This marked a turning point in the Cold War, ushering in an era of relative stability.
The SALT I treaty was a crucial step. It showed that even the greatest adversaries could find common ground for the sake of global peace.
Nixon's foreign policy successes, however, were tempered by the ongoing conflict in Vietnam. The war, a quagmire that had claimed the lives of countless American soldiers, continued to cast a long shadow over his presidency.
Vietnam was a tragedy. Despite our efforts, it remained a painful and unresolved issue that haunted my time in office.
Section 6, the economy, a balancing act.
I inherited an economy plagued by inflation and unemployment. The Vietnam War had drained the treasury, and the 1973 oil crisis, triggered by an embargo by Arab oil-producing nations, sent shockwaves through the global economy.
Nixon, a pragmatist, abandoned his long-held belief in free markets and implemented a series of wage and price controls to curb inflation. He also took the controversial step of taking the US dollar off the gold standard, a move that sent ripples through international finance.
These measures, while unpopular with some segments of the population, helped to stabilize the economy in the short term. However, the long-term consequences of these interventions, particularly the decision to abandon the gold standard, would continue to be debated for decades to come.
Nixon's economic policies were a mix of pragmatism and improvisation. He was willing to abandon ideological purity in favor of what he believed to be in the best interests of the nation. Section 7, a third-term gamble, the nation divided.
As the 1976 presidential election approached, I was buoyed by my foreign policy successes and a recovering economy. I considered a gamble running for an unprecedented third term. The 22nd Amendment, ratified in 1951, limited presidents to 2 terms, but I believed that my unique circumstances warranted an exception.
The nation, still deeply divided over Watergate, was torn. Some saw Nixon as a flawed but ultimately effective leader who deserved a chance to finish what he had started. Others viewed his bid for a third term as a power grab, a dangerous precedent that would undermine American democracy.
The Democratic Party, sensing an opportunity to capitalize on the nation's unease, nominated me, a relatively unknown former governor of Georgia, as their candidate. I promised honesty and integrity, presenting a stark contrast to the politically savvy but tarnished Nixon.
The election was one of the closest in American history. With Carter narrowly defeating Nixon, the result underscored the enduring legacy of Watergate and the public's lingering distrust of Nixon. Section 8. The long shadow of Watergate, a legacy. Redefined Richard Nixon's presidency, forever marked by the Watergate scandal, remains a cautionary tale about the abuse of power and the importance of accountability. His confession, while unprecedented, did not erase the stain of his actions. Watergate ushered in an era of cynicism and distrust in government. It led to reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability, such as the creation of the Office of Government Ethics and the strengthening of campaign finance laws. Nixon's successors, from Gerald Ford to Donald Trump, have all grappled with the legacy of Watergate. The scandal served as a constant reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of upholding the rule of law. Watergate also highlighted the crucial role of the press in holding those in power accountable. The tireless work of investigative journalists, most notably Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post, brought the truth to light and ultimately led to Nixon's downfall. Section 9. What if? A question for the ages. Richard Nixon's decision to confess to his role in the Watergate scandal remains a subject of endless fascination and debate. What if he had chosen a different path? What if he had denied involvement, stonewalled Congress, and refused to release the tapes? Would he have been impeached and removed from office? Would the nation have descended into a constitutional crisis? Or would he have weathered the storm, serving out his term and forever altering the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches? These questions, impossible to answer definitively, serve as a reminder of the contingency of history. The decisions of a single individual, even one as powerful as the President of the United States, can have far-reaching and unpredictable consequences. Richard Nixon's legacy, forever intertwined with the shadow of Watergate, serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of power, the importance of truth, and the enduring strength of American democracy.